Welcome to the Hands Up If You're Human podcast, dedicated to exploring and celebrating the messy reality of being human. In these conversations, we'll be discussing the many challenges and barriers we all face that prevent us feeling connected, fulfilled, and happy, and explore the ways we can create the lives we really want to live by understanding, accepting, and fully embracing everything that simply makes us human. From our innate gifts and the things we've been taught to think of as our flaws, to our deepest unmet needs and desires that we feel shame over, we want to explore all the nuance and complexity that comes as a package deal simply by being human. Recognizing and accepting all of our true selves empowers us to authentically show up in all aspects of our lives. And now more than ever, it feels like the world needs as much acceptance and authenticity as possible. My name is Wyndham.
And my name is Lisa.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Yeah, really good. Looking forward to this episode.
Yeah, I think before we start, the eagle-eared of our dedicated listenership will have heard a change in name of us.
Yes.
We are now Hands Up If You're Human.
And how do you feel about that?
Yeah, really happy, really happy. Those who've listened to the first two episodes will know originally we were all that we are. The truth behind all of that is not a unique space in the podcasting or internet world. And we were second to it. So somebody reached out to us and informed us that it wasn't a unique space, and they are significantly more established in their adventure with that space. So we have changed our name, and it took us a little while, a bit of head scratching, because you land on a name and it feels perfect, and you then have to find something else that does the same thing. I think we've landed on something that does the same thing. What about you?
I'm really delighted that we landed with what we have.
Yeah.
Originally, yes, it felt like we were never going to find a name that would encompass everything that we wanted it to be, because
everything else was taken.
Yeah, it's really, really tricky. But no, I feel that it's part of the growth of what we're about, and we're on a journey, right? And yeah, if anything, it helped me personally really, really understand what it is that we're trying to put out in the world. Yeah. And actually, we just want to be of service to as many people as possible simply by being human. So hands up if you're human,
Yeah.
Don't get any more simpler than that, really.
Exactly. It's like the lowest bar to entry we could come up with, but equally the most reflective of what we're trying to do, right? We're all essentially going through the same things. Yes, they're all nuanced. Yes, our individual experiences are different, but the underlying essence of being a human, it remains the same for all of us. And that gets you in the club.
Yep.
Good. Okay, so we won't mention the change in name again. This is who we are. We are Hands Up If You're Human, and welcome to the podcast. Very quickly, before we get on to Imposter Syndrome, which was a request given to us a number of weeks ago that somebody wanted us to talk about, I just wanted to reflect on the last episode, perfectionism. And I'd just like to thank the listeners who bothered to take the time to get in touch with us. I know you had somebody get directly in touch with you. We had somebody email the show mid-listening to the episode. So I don't quite know what it was we were talking about that resonated so strongly, but for people to interrupt what they're doing to send us a note, tell us a bit about their story, we're really grateful for that. So I would just like to thank those who did, and anybody else who feels inclined to get in touch, please do.
Absolutely. It just, I mean, it's not for our own ego or anything like that. I think it just gives us that confidence that it's actually something that people really would like to listen to and is helpful, and is, like we said, I keep saying the word of service, but being of service rather than just another podcast of people having a conversation. It's got depth to it, and it's coming from a place, and we are growing. We want to offer what you need. So the more you interact with us, the more we know, then we're on the right track, and we hopefully can deliver great conversations.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, it's nice to know people are listening. Right? My ego sometimes needs a little bit of a stroke. So I'm very pleased.
Yeah, to be fair, that's true. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so imposter syndrome, an interesting one. I'm going to ask you your experience with it, of it, all that kind of stuff. How does imposter syndrome kind of resonate with you?
This is such an interesting one for me, because I feel in the last 15 years that I've been exactly where I'm supposed to be with what I'm learning, what I'm putting out, be it that I'm a beginner, I'm okay with not knowing and learning on the go. So I haven't put myself in that many situations over the last 15 years where I would feel that, oh God, regarding work, definitely, that's specifically, I don't feel like an imposter. I just feel like I'm always going to be learning, and it's always going to be, I'm not going to deliver anything that I don't have some knowledge on. However, when I used to go in and out of, so for university, for example, I went through clearing. Okay. So that to me felt like I wasn't really supposed to be there. So right. I got the great grades that I needed for, and it was a university that I wanted to go to, but I didn't get there through UCAS, because you had to audition. I was told that I'd be on the waiting list for the auditions because I was almost good enough. And then I got the grades, and there was some space in clearing, and I got in. So right. When I originally started at university, I felt like I wasn't worthy of that place. So there's an element of imposter syndrome started to kick in, because I feel like it's feeling like you are not good enough and you haven't got the right qualifications or the right attributes. However, once I got in there, I just realized I just wasn't very good at acting. I just wasn't very good. Like I wasn't meant to be a performer. And the same with, I ended up working in Disneyland, and then these are, I mean, it's not, these are not corporate jobs. These are like, me following a dream that I had from a little girl, that I was going to be a performer. And I was working in hotels in Cyprus, I think, at the time, and I left saying, I want to work in Disneyland. Like, that's what I'm going to go for an audition. And by wonders of manifestation or whatever, serendipity moment, there was the auditions in Pineapple Studios in London the week I got back. It was for the cruise line, so off I go. And nobody got in for the cruises, but they did say, can you stay behind and audition for Euro Disney? So again, and a lot of us got in there, but I always felt like, but that wasn't really what we were going for. Like, we were kind of like not good enough for the cruises, but we're all right for Euro Disney.
You're all right for people who are going to see you once and then go home. But for people who are going to see you 7 days in a row, they're going to start seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're the times that I feel like, if I reflect back, I never felt like I was particularly the best dancer or the best performer or whatever, but clearly there was something, and I was meant to do it. Otherwise, now looking back at my adult self and, more grown up and more mature, like going, but you got in, and some people, it's their biggest achievement they ever had. For me, it was just one of my lifetimes. To me, that feels like, it's not even, I wouldn't even put it on a CV or anything, it was just something I did, like it was an, however, when you put me in a corporate environment, so in and out of university, in and out of studies, in and out of going to drama school, I would come home and I would get an office job or something. I felt totally out of my depth, and I felt like I was then definitely an imposter. I felt like I had to then put on a performance that I was an office worker and I knew what was going on. And I did recruitment all for about 5 seconds. And I was so terrible on the computer, but instead of putting my hands up, which I would do now, so I just don't know how to do this, I would pretend I knew what I was doing and then spend the whole evening or dreading Sunday night going into work on the Monday because I actually didn't know what was going on. So I felt like an imposter then.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I've only known you 4 years, 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And so when we first met each other, you were 11, 12 years into this kind of broad strokes version of Lisa, who is not interested in going into a corporate environment, would never look to do that. And so that kind of previous experience of temping and things like that, I mean, they call it temping, right? It's temporary. But the imposter syndrome felt there. Did you know that was always going to be temporary, as in those kind of jobs?
No, so I feel that I was trying to conform at that point to
Okay.
what looked like a proper job.
Yeah.
And therefore I didn't fit in. Like I just, it's not true to any part of my nature to fit in an office environment. And I used to have terrible anxiety and I just didn't feel like me at all. And don't get me wrong, it's not then I then recognized that straight away. Obviously, I went on a journey after that, and I ended up, as we talked about in our other episodes, going traveling and finding yoga, and even that wasn't what I planned to do. It just kind of became something step by step. But I think at that point, yes, I don't think I thought it was temporary. I thought it was, I've got to prove myself to others. Not that my parents put pressure on that, but I felt that need some stability. And that's one thing that from a corporate job is that you'll get there is some kind of stability with what you're going to get salary. There's some benefits
perception
of
of
some
stability.
sort. Yes, absolutely. But again, that wasn't authentic. I didn't know I wasn't being authentic. It was authentic in that moment.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it was just, no, doing this this is just to look good rather than to be good.
Yeah.
To be good at what I do.
Yeah, it's interesting because you also said about prove myself to others. And it's a really interesting one. I've had clients who have come with this as, they want other people to think highly of them, to think them competent, to praise them and kind of give them positive feedback. And yet when they get it, they don't believe it. It's not enough. They're always looking for something else that goes, not sure they're genuine, or man, I have conned these people. So that kind of external validation is a prime example of, it's never going to be enough. It can't be, because ultimately what I think we're looking for is that internal solid space where we go, I'm enough. I don't have to prove myself to anybody else. And because if I do, then there's always somebody else who can take that validation away from me. And then where do I end up?
But there's also an element when you do, go for an interview or you're looking for a new role, that you do have to sell yourself. So it's a tricky one, because of course you're hopefully showing your best self. You've done the research. I mean, I remember we're going into recruitment and it was like, I did all the research, but I was great at like pretending to be knowing this stuff. I did a brilliant presentation, hence why I got the job. And I was very new to go and ask when was my next interview. I played the game, but ultimately then you've got to feel like you've got to live up to that. And I imagine that with, again, some of my clients that come to me, is like they're the same. Like another student, she went through clearing, she's super, super smart, but to her, she's too slow. She's comparing herself constantly to her peers and not actually owning why she's there in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, my early career, I was excellent at getting jobs. I was terrible at doing the job, because I geared myself. I remember going to job interviews, and in the walk up to the main, like in central London, for example, I interviewed at a job right down by Piccadilly Circus. And I walked up from Waterloo, and it's about a 20-minute walk. And the whole of that walk, I was getting my game face on. I was practicing resilience, because it was a recruitment job and I knew they would push and push and push and push and push and push to see whether I could cope with whatever pressure they threw at me. And so I went into that interview bullish, and I'm not that person. And then when you get the job, you then end up in this situation where it's like, oh, crap, I have to be the person they've hired. This is not their fault. This is on me, because I'm the one who has, instead of saying, this is not for me, because I wasn't mature enough, I didn't have that reflection, I didn't know who I was conforming as well. You then find yourself in a situation where it's like, well, this is who I've got to pretend to be now. And there's when I was thinking about this, I thought, I've never experienced imposter syndrome. And then I remembered the perfectionist episode, and I thought, am I just deluding myself that I'm self-aware? And actually, I'm not at all. And I look back on it, and I don't think I've experienced imposter syndrome in the way that it conjures in my mind. I was definitely an imposter, definitely, because I was pretending to be somebody I wasn't, and I did not belong in that environment. However, I think there's the reason I don't feel I've ever suffered from imposter syndrome. I think there are two. I've thought about this a lot in the last few weeks, and I think there are two reasons why I don't feel I've had imposter syndrome. The first being, I've never cared about any job I've done. I've never cared about, I don't want to get fired, but I just didn't care about the jobs. So I couldn't muster enough energy. And ultimately, it didn't matter if I was fired, to me, because at that time I don't know whether it was arrogance or it might have been arrogance. I was 100% confident I'd walk into another job. It would still be a job I didn't want to do. I would still be pretending to be somebody, but I was confident I had that make-believe refined enough that I could persuade somebody to give me a job. And then it was always a sense of, okay, the clock is ticking until I get kicked out, or I choose to leave, or whatever it is. So I think one of the things is that I didn't care, therefore I wasn't trying very hard, particularly. And then I think the other thing that I find really interesting about imposter syndrome is it's as much a system as it is us. So when lots of things you read, or those annoying things on social media that are 2 sentences, complex idea boiled down to 2 sentences. I see a lot of stuff on imposter syndrome that says it's just you in your growth space. Of course you feel uncomfortable. It's okay, push through. And yet, I think imposter syndrome primarily is part of a system that we end up in. And that system makes it very difficult to be included. So I talk about inclusion criteria in every group we are a part of, whether it's family, whether it's friends, especially work. And the inclusion criteria are essentially the behaviors we are told we have to adhere to in order to be accepted. And they come in 4 kind of flavors. There's the explicit, where somebody tells us exactly what is expected of us. There's the implied, which is all that subtext that we kind of pick up on. The third one is the assumed, and I think this is a big contributor to imposter syndrome, is the things we think are expected of us in order to stay included. And then the fourth one, which I think is one of the systemic problems, is inconsistent inclusion criteria. So if we work in an environment that expressly implied, or somehow we have assumed, or indeed there are these inconsistent inclusion criteria, how can we possibly feel stable enough? How can we possibly feel we're standing on solid enough ground to hold our hands up and say, I don't know. I don't know how to do this. I'm confident I will learn, but I don't know how to do it now. Somebody help me. If we're in an environment where we don't feel safe to do that, then we're in this pretend mode, and how do I survive until I can do it?
Mm.
That's a bit of a ramble. I'm not quite sure where that came from.
No, it's great. And that last point is, I think, why don't we? If someone puts their hands up and said, I don't know how to do it, how are we meant to know everything? Like genuinely, how are we meant to know? And like you said, if it's constantly changing, and it takes that one person to have the courage to say, no, I don't know how to do this. And I bet the rest of the bloody people in the company were like, not all of them, because some people will protect themselves and want to keep that the image, or wherever they've managed to, the mask and whatever on. But ultimately, Jesus Christ, that is being human, not, like you said, adhering to stop conforming.
Yeah, but equally that is as well. We're constantly exposed to these, what we perceive to be threats, and the work environment is such a tricky environment to navigate, because we don't see who people are. We don't go into work and go, hey, this is me. Or if we do, then we're earmarked as, be careful of that weirdo. They're going to tell you something, they're going to speak from the heart, or they're going to say something inappropriate, or whatever it might be. So everybody is walking around behind a projection of who they want people to think they are. And I think that's part of the challenge as well, because it's how much of what we project being what we want people to think we are is based on what we assume they need to see in order for them to accept us and keep us in the group. That assumed inclusion criteria, I think, is a really difficult one. It's the only one we have any control over. If an organization comes in and goes, I expect you to do 40 hours a week in the office, that is an explicit inclusion criteria. If they say, you know what, we're really flexible, yeah, it's 40 hours, but all we really want to do is make sure your outcomes are good, that's explicit. If they behave in a way that then goes, I haven't seen you in the office, why aren't you in the office? Then we're starting to muddy the waters, and those inclusion criteria are changing. When we then kind of overlay the performances we're expected, that are expected of us, or that we assume is expected of us, it starts getting really muddy. And like I say, nobody's coming into the office kind of going, hey, guess what? This all seems bullshit to me. Somebody please tell me how to do this. I got somebody sent me a note on Instagram. I put out a note a couple of weeks ago saying, we're going to talk about imposter syndrome. I want to hear your stories. I just want to read what this person has put. I'm a qualified mental health nurse and feel like an imposter most days at work. I deliver therapy both on a one-to-one and group basis. Every time I take on a new patient, the imposter syndrome rears its head. I combat this by ensuring I've read my patient notes thoroughly and take the first couple of sessions to get to know my patient, build rapport, and understand their symptoms and functioning, or lack of in some cases. I take the opportunity to engage in clinical supervision with someone more experienced than me, and more recently I've asked to go on courses and refresher courses to improve my knowledge. This benefits me and my patients. There's a saying in the Royal Navy, prior preparation prevents piss poor performance. I try to live by that. I'm always honest with patients when I'm stuck or don't know something. Just admitting you don't have all the answers can make you feel better and allows you space to think and gain control again. Really interesting. This is everyday imposter syndrome arises in this person. And I think what's interesting is they talk about how they combat it is supervision. I think professional supervision is a good idea anyway, and more qualifications. And I wonder whether, I'm not questioning that, if that works for them, brilliant. I wonder whether it comes back to this internal, external validation conversation.
And I remember there was a point where I kept training, and somebody said to me, Lisa, like, you know enough. Like, why are you doing that? Like,
Yeah.
why? For what purpose? You don't need to fill yourself up with any more knowledge. Just teach with what, or offer what you have. Yeah, and possibly that is outside validation, or again, another thing that somebody may look up your qualifications. If I've got more qualifications, I've got letters after my name, if I've got this, then that makes me more than that person that hasn't done that.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, you would have learnt more, and but actually implementing it, it doesn't make you warrant you from not being able to do your job or your role that you've got. It's just how you apply it, right? So I asked my husband this morning, I said, he says he has it all the time. He's a manager at Microsoft, and he always talks about intelligence, and it's something that we've talked about it before. Like, I'm not academically intelligent, and it bothers me. It bothers me that I'm not. But actually, I've got intelligence in other ways. And actually, when I had the conversation with my husband this morning, very similar to him, he's around very, very clever people, but they don't know how to do certain things that he can do, which is either come natural to him or because his career journey has taken him there, that he has learned that along the way. So this comparison thing of qualifications, intelligence, it's just fascinating how we measure ourselves against each other.
Yeah.
Rather than going, oh, right, hang on a second, right, cool, well, I'm this kind of person, and actually I learned this way, and I've got this, and actually I've had a life experience that makes me actually really qualified to offer this or do that. Or, do you know what, I haven't had much life experience, I've thrown everything into, let's do degrees, PhDs, masters, or whatever.
MAs,
Great.
MBAs, all that kind of stuff, PhDs.
Incredible. Different personality types, different needs, different way of being of service.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I get people into my LinkedIn inbox a lot saying, hey, I notice your background. Some of them think I would be great at teaching AI how to speak Ukrainian. Well, I don't know where they got that from, but there we are. But I consistently get offered the opportunity to join an MBA. And I don't care about an MBA. And that whole idea of more and more qualifications, of course, there is a minimum requirement to acquire knowledge and professionalism and systems and techniques and tools and all this stuff. Of course, there is for almost every avenue in life. At some point, we get to an area where it's okay. So I'm going to pay for somebody to judge me. So they give me a piece of paper I can take to somebody else to say, look, a third party thinks I'm worthy. Let me in this club. And for me, it was a big kind of, I had no ambition to PhD or MBA or MA or anything like that. But I got so many of these things, I started wondering what it meant. And that's where I've landed. I have to be open enough to build my own knowledge, not pretend I know something I don't know, and get to a place where I recognize where I'm looking for somebody else to tell me I'm good enough, when in actual fact, I can only find that within me. And the idea of getting somebody to write me a certificate, and I go through the hard work. I'm not diminishing the effort and all of those things required to achieve those things. At its basic level, in my view, it's this kind of, well, somebody else tells somebody else that I'm good enough for them. And it also means that somebody else can tell somebody I'm not good enough. And what do I do then? So I'm kind of rudderless. But you also said, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, it's interesting, isn't it, when I was thinking about someone else I know, and actually all they ever do is degrees, and another degree, and actually they haven't actually worked for the last God knows how long. So then they're even fearful of, well, they've got the 2-1 or the first or whatever, that, really good grades, but still don't feel like they're worthy enough for then going for the role that they are learning about. And I get that, and I also get there's a curiosity for me when I'm going on a course, or it's normally because I'm curious. It's coming from, I want to learn, not because somebody else, like you said, is going to judge me. And I actually don't care about the certificate or the grade. I'm more about, oh, am I going to learn? Like, what is this going to enrich what I'm already doing? And on a business level, and more importantly these days, on a personal level, how can I implement that in all aspects of my life, in the kind of trainings that I do these days? And that's why I don't feel like I've had imposter syndrome for a long time, because I don't feel like I ever go to something that I don't want to do because I've chosen to do it, and someone else external has encouraged me to do it. It's coming because it's me wanting to better myself or learn more. And yeah, and being aligned to what I truly feel like I'm here to do, with growth, so it doesn't get bored. I don't get bored, because I get bored really quickly.
Yeah. So we met on our coaching training qualification. How did you feel in that space?
So I absolutely felt that I was, well, I'm going to own it. I felt like I was definitely meant to be there, and I was ahead of the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Not with the coaching tools, not with the modules that we were taught, didn't know all of that. That was all new. But in terms of, is this something that I can do? Yes. Did I love the conversations we had? Yes. Did I look forward to it every month? Absolutely, 100%. Nothing was hard work. Nothing felt like a chore to do. Got me thinking, had to do some research, but ultimately, no, not an imposter at all. To the point where I think, oh God, I hope I wasn't that irritating one that felt like she was the first one to talk all the time. But I felt like I had a lot to give, and and to share, which was great.
Yeah. Interesting.
And you?
I think I felt the same way. I think so. Earlier I said that one of the reasons I don't think I've had it is because I didn't try at anything. That's not entirely true. I have tried at things. So I'm a trained mediator. I'm a trained yoga teacher. I'm a trained coach, and I now practice as a coach. I've tried all of those things, and I've tried hard at those things. I never felt like an imposter in any of those spaces. And I think it's because, one, like I said, systemically, there are fewer barriers for me than other people. So I have the unearned advantage of, in the society we live in, I'm white, I'm male, I'm educated, and I'm cishet. So without particularly diving off into those areas, the systems we work under and our society works under, just that there are fewer barriers to me, right? There are fewer spaces that demand I jump through hoops, right? I qualify automatically. The other thing is I was old enough and I had done enough reflection to recognize those choices to go to train as a mediator and a yoga teacher and a coach were aligned with who I am. I was no longer pretending or seeking external validation. I knew, or I was more aware of the meaning I was trying to create in my life. And I had identified those mechanisms that might help me. So when I went into those spaces, exactly like you said, it was, okay, this is aligned to who I am. This doesn't feel like a chore. Yes, it can be hard, but it doesn't feel like I'm trying to be something I'm not. And the other thing was, at no point, certainly with the mediation and with the yoga, I never felt there were inconsistent inclusion criteria. So certainly with the yoga, I was the oldest by at least 10 years. And, we all have a view of what Western yoga spaces look like. I was the oldest by 10 years. Everybody was terribly beautiful. And this middle-aged old man comes in going, yeah, no, desperately unhappy in life. This is my ticket out. But everybody I encountered in those spaces was supportive and encouraging. And interestingly, I don't know whether there's a correlation with this, but the majority of the people holding space were women and were amazing. Just completely opening, completely welcoming. It's like there is, and getting yoga rather than it being physically performative. They understand they're the deeper yoga teachers rather than the physical practice teachers. So now I don't have it because I'm doing the right things and I know the space I'm in, and I recognize that I get to validate myself. I don't always do it. And there are days when I come out of a coaching space thinking, I am not a good coach.
Mm.
And then there are conversations you have and people go, yeah, I mean, you don't get to say that. It's the person you're working with who gets to say whether you're good or not, because it's the impact you're having on them. But I don't feel like an imposter. You said you were talking about the comparison piece, and the note I just read about the mental health nurse. On a different point, sorry, but on that comparison piece, I think there's this idea of comparison is the thief of joy. So when we go into these spaces, we look at other people and go, oh my God, they're so much more competent than I am. They're so much more confident than I am. I don't belong here. I think we're too surface level on that. Comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison is inevitable. It's just taking one thing and placing it against another and seeing the differences. That's the comparison, or the perception of the difference. It's our reaction to comparison that is the thief of joy. Because if I've got 5 apples and you've got 6 apples, I don't need 6 apples, it's fine. The comparison doesn't make me unhappy. Mm. If I've got 7 people who want an apple and I'm responsible for giving them an apple, then there's a comparison issue. Right? That is a terrible example. But you get my point, I hope.
I do get your point. And I think that comes back down to, so although I might not feel like I've had imposter syndrome, now I've done the same. I've done a coaching session and gone, oh my goodness, I can't believe someone just paid me for that. Or, you know, and again, I don't get to choose. And actually, normally those are the sessions that the client comes back and says, oh, they've had this, you know, moment, a pivotal point, or they've had a reflection that's totally, you know, it's been the most enriching one. So it's my judgment of that. But imposter syndrome, maybe not something that I've experienced much, like I said, in the last 10 years, but I have felt like I don't fit in. So being like going, okay, I'm making the right choices for my career and what I'm here to do, that all feels aligned. But then holding myself as that self in every situation I go into is very, very different. Mm. So like, for example, there's been times that, you know, when Paul, my husband, we used to go to a Microsoft event because he'd won an award, and we'd go and I'd panic about, oh my God, what am I going to talk to these people? Because I'm not like, I don't know anything about software and I don't know anything about even how Microsoft runs. I don't care. I do care, but I don't care, if you know what I mean. Oh God, I mean, like I felt inferior to them. And so therefore I felt like an imposter. I shouldn't be here right now. I need to have had a job where I am also, well, you know, I'm at whatever, like a competitor or something that felt like it had more substance. What I did recognize was once I let my barriers down and I released that, and the more and more I've gone to things like, oh, do you know what? People love to have a proper conversation and to sit and find out what you're doing and talk about more holistic therapies and coaching and yoga therapy. Like actually, it's a brilliant place to be your authentic self. But that bit has taken me a long time. And I talked about it last episode. I had a studio. In my studio, I was the best version of myself.
This is a yoga studio. You ran your own.
I ran my own yoga studio for 6 years. It was a space, so it wasn't multiple rooms, but it was. So I would be teaching there, or I'd be offering workshops there, or there was all sorts of things, different things going on in there, and I felt aligned, not an imposter. Weirdly, I would then adapt and change as I came out of that environment, even in my house to start off with, because my husband already had children, so it was already a way of being in that house, that I would dampen myself to fit in, because weirdly, if anything, I felt like an imposter, if in terms of what an imposter means, that I'm not meant to be in this environment. I'm having to put on a role to fit in. Really interesting. And I did that a lot through different aspects of my life. And I can comfortably sit here now and go, that has taken me a lot of work to do. That's like on a personal level. But I feel like now I'm like, do you know what? Don't get me wrong, I'm good at reading a room, and I'm not going to go in and let's talk chakras and we're going to talk really deep and meaningfuls. I do know there's a time and a place for it, but ultimately I don't feel the need to try and be something that I'm not.
Yeah.
So therefore I'm not the imposter anymore. I am just in the room.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So if we assume my inclusion criteria theory is true, and it is a big if, when you were saying about feeling like you changed yourself even to come home, was that an explicit inclusion criteria? Had your family said, Lisa, we're not having that in this house? Was it implied? Was it assumed?
Well, it was my assumption that that's what they wanted from me.
Yeah.
Really interesting, really, really interesting. And I think that comes from my lack of confidence and where I was at that time. I wasn't established. However, and I think this is something that someone talked to you about, by feeling that way, gave me the momentum to actually weirdly to train more, to have to work out how to do my own publicity. Not that I'm great at that still now, but in terms of that was my catalyst to become better at my trade.
Yeah. This is a really lovely link as well. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, and I just think that that's so the angst that used to come, that so I always think anxiety is a really interesting one. It's either people say it's a difference between that feeling is the same as excitement or anxiety. It's just the breath or how your mindset on it.
Yeah.
But I used to have that anxious feeling quite a lot, but it was the fire to kind of like, okay, well, come on, you can, because you probably can do more than you're doing. You are, and actually, it was a really positive feeling. At the time, felt dreadful.
Yeah, it's a really long. Yeah, it's a great link. Somebody emailed the show, and I want to read you their email because it talks to that point. Hey there, I thought I would drop you a couple of thoughts about imposter syndrome and how it has shaped my professional and personal life. It's been a constant companion as long as I can remember, always on the edge of being exposed as a fake. Being deeply unhappy as a teenager to the point of living in a never-ending narrative where I longed to be anyone else. Trapped in my own life, I grew up with a father who relished the opportunity to tell me I was lazy, couldn't do anything right, and seemed to know my precise fear on exposing it to the world. I either stopped trying or actively went the opposite way. When I got my first job at the age of 13, I was shocked and wary when I was praised for my work. But then came the moment of clarity. My illusion was working, and that I had pulled the wool over my new boss's eyes, and he had fallen for the con that I was good at the job. I stayed in that weekend job for 6 years, having taken time off school when I was needed for cover during the week. I was always pushing myself harder so that I wouldn't be exposed, as I liked this feeling of gratitude, of conning people that I was good at something. I wanted more of it. So my constant companion has stayed with me throughout my career, always rising to a challenge, never saying, I'm sorry, I can't do that, which has got me into a few professional scrapes, but on reflection has helped me achieve a lot. Still, every time I do a piece of work, whether that is running a training course, devising a play, or developing a new system to improve the experience for the people I support, I always I always listen to my trusty constant companion saying, this is the time they're going to find you out. Really interesting. And I went back to this person, and because I think of imposter syndrome as a negative, but this is someone who, yes, they have to live with this voice and it pushes them to be better, which is exactly what you said. You learn a whole load of things because your imposter syndrome was saying, you don't belong in this room. But if I learn this, I might. And I went back to this person, thanked them deeply, and asked them, so if you had a choice, would you be without it? And instantly they came back with an unequivocal never. It is my constant companion. It is my constant pushing to be better. Really, really interesting. But this person goes on to ask us a question. What are you both concerned about being discovered about yourself? How did you cover it up? And does that play into any fears when presenting this podcast, where you are unpacking subjects that many people will have struggled with for years? I'm happy to go first on this one, if you like.
Yeah, do.
So, what am I concerned about being discovered about myself? I think I mentioned it in the last episode. Not being good enough. My biggest fear is finding out that whatever vision and image of myself I have, I can't reach it. I'm not good enough. There's part of me. I was, when I grew up, like I said, I've very few barriers to me in life, which is not the same as saying I have an easy life. It's not. The society we live in is, life is difficult. We are human beings. I have fewer barriers than other people. I'm intelligent, I'm personable, I'm all these positive things. I'm good at certain things. I'm very good at certain things. I'm terrible at certain things. I've always had this base of confidence maybe it's a little bit misguided, but I have high expectations of myself. And my biggest fear is I can't reach those expectations. And so, like I've said before, I've not tried. And this is the first kind of last few years of the first time I'm moving into a space of going, let's find out. Let's move out of the sense of mediocrity, my own mediocrity, and start pushing to see what's possible. Because it doesn't matter if I fail. I find that very hard to hold on to. And I know it's true. So that's my big fear. And in presenting this, my big fear is that you and I are just going to have a lovely conversation that we love and we learn from, and it has no relevance to anybody else.
Yeah.
But again, I don't think that's true, but that's the deeper fear. What about you?
Regarding the podcast, very similar. It's interesting actually. You sent me a podcast. It was Dawn French and on Happy Place.
Dawn Cotton, yeah.
And it was saying about like Dawn French was the very first ever host that she had, and when she was asked by phone, would you come on it? She said, well, I don't even, didn't even know what podcast. Yeah, sure, but I don't know what podcast is. Now it's like, it's a big space, right? So there is an element the same that it will just be, it doesn't matter if we're small or large. That's not the goal necessarily. It's are we just one of those ones that are,
and to some people, undoubtedly, we will be.
Of course we will. So with the podcast, what am I fearful of people finding out? How deeply depressed and the breakdown that I had, which I do talk about but that held me back for so long, feeling like I was broken. I definitely wasn't good enough, that people are going to judge me. People also who knew me at that time, even now, haven't updated me. So there's certain family members from when I had that when I see them, it's like
they haven't updated their perception of who you are.
Perception of who I am. And I think that people don't have the opportunity to update any of us all the time, because especially if you're doing what we call the work, it takes us a while to establish ourselves in that next growth. So other people are definitely not going to, but exposing, like I said, like it's funny me even talking about like Disney and drama school and all of that, because it genuinely feels like a different Lisa. Like, it was like, I feel like I've lived lifetimes after lifetimes in one lifetime.
Yeah.
So it's like chapters of a book, but like weirdly doesn't feel like it's in the same book. It's like actually separate books, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And actually, when I met up with someone this Friday just gone, who's written a novel on her life experience, and I said I probably would write my life in a novel. She knew nothing about my life, and we'd been speaking for about an hour, and then I just said, well, and these are the kind of things that I would put in there. She even said, oh my God, that's like a trilogy, right? Like, that's not one book. Like, and I'm like, yeah, I know, but it'd be a page turn at least.
It's the new Lord of the Rings. It's 9 hours of film.
Yeah, God, no, that'd be awful. But that's my biggest fear, that part where I was absolutely broken to the point where I did not want to even be on this planet anymore. That being exposed, I worry that some people would therefore not think that I am the right person to support them in their growth, in their development, in their self-development. However, the more I've got, the more I read, and the more people that I'm into, and how, the books and what I listen to, most of those people have gone through something pretty intense and had to go through some healing, that they talk from a really depth of knowing and empathy, and why it works, whatever they're offering, why it works, because they are living proof of that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that whole idea of, I think sometimes we can look at, who do we get help from? Should it be the person who's never had any problems, or should it be the person who's overcome their problems and has a perspective on it? And when you look at it like that, it's like, what can I learn from someone who's never had any problems? Not that that person exists, by the way, but if I have a distinct challenge, surely it's better to go to someone who's overcome that distinct challenge.
But I think as you're talking, we've said about it before, like, you need to be in a good place to be as good. You can't be perfectly aligned all the time when you're doing like, life is life. Like, so, you might have had an argument with your husband, or you might have, you've been up all night because your child's been ill. So but you still got to go to work, because if we stopped at everything that life threw at us, then we wouldn't actually ever go anywhere. But there is a point where you do need to take the break when there is massive life events and crisis. And I feel that because my life has been so intensely challenging, that like the reasons why people could come to me are for so many different reasons. It's not one trauma, one tragedy. And so, because it's been constant, and it's been, even a couple of years ago, it was, I lost my mum and my brother within 3 months of each other. I could now feel that I am in a good place to be able to support someone, say, if they had grief, and understand it, and understand that it's I wanted to find the positives in grief really quickly, move on, and offer my services. What I've learned from that was like, oh no, I needed a lot of space around that. And actually, if someone came to me for grief, or talked to me about their disabled siblings or mental health issues, at that, it was too intense for me. My wounds was definitely not healed enough.
I think grief is a really interesting conversation for us to have at some point. We've both had our experiences with it, so I think we will definitely have that conversation at some point. But I think with regard to imposter syndrome and the conversation we're having today, I'm conscious we don't want to run these to be like 4 hours of us chattering. We can do that at another time. But before we what I would like to do is, I'd like to read one more note somebody sent me, and then I would like to ask you the question: what do you recommend people do if they think they're experiencing imposter syndrome? And then I'll offer what I think as well. But I just wanted to read this as well. To me, imposter syndrome looks like doom scrolling through social media and comparing myself to my peers, aka competitors. Then in creeps the, I did that, why didn't I get results like they did? that then holds me back from moving forwards. And it takes a lot of catching myself to pull myself out of that downward spiral. Imposter syndrome will catch up with the best of us, and it's inevitable. Learning ways to identify it and challenge it are the only coping strategies I have. Because, bitch, I ain't perfect, nor do I want to be. And my peers aren't perfect either. They just may be better at doing smoke and mirrors on social than I am. I think the interesting thing there is I know this person, and we had conversations around, why do we want to be somebody else? Why do we? Because we don't get to, when that comparison piece, it's not the comparison, it's our reaction to it. And if I offer you the opportunity to somebody you can, not you personally, but someone compares themselves to, you can be them, but you have to be all of them. You don't get to cherry pick. You have to take everything that is them and leave everything that is you to the side. Do you make that trade? And I don't know many people who would be willing to take everything that somebody else is. And there's only ever, and I know it's a bit of a cliche, but there's that idea of don't pretend to be somebody else. Don't pretend to be that person they're already taken. You can only be you. And nobody can be you better than you. So for me, it's finding, well, how do I ground my own value and understand that I'm worthy of taking up space? Anyway, you've had a little bit of time. I don't know whether you expected me to ask you that question, but
no.
As we come to wrap up, if somebody is or has suffered from imposter syndrome and it is having a detrimental effect on them, what would you recommend their approach be? I'm not going to ask you for one thing because there's never just one thing, but your initial thoughts on how to approach imposter syndrome.
Well, with the example you just gave, straight away, I was thinking about social media and that feeling that people are doing better, or what personally I get if I'm unconfident or I'm off balance in some way, and then I go, or I feel pity for myself, but well, I haven't had, they haven't had all the stuff that's going on, blah, 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 blah. So with that, if it was somebody asked me, how do I, firstly, I would be checking in on, like, okay, what else is going on right now? Like, let's look at what you are good at. Let's look at all the attributes that you can straight away say you're good at. And then I would explore the other things that perhaps they haven't recognized yet or understand, where maybe they're, actually, I'm quite good at writing, or whatever it is that they haven't even given themselves credit to. Because I feel like it's a disconnect from themselves, and that's why they feel the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
So all the tools that I would use would obviously be a yoga practice, because I do think that comes back to self, quieting the mind through mindful practices or meditation, and to come back to self. Because if you're worried so much, or like you said, you've gone into a career that just brings you angst every time you go to work, then you are not aligning yourself. Like both of us have said, we are aligned to what we want to be doing now, so it feels comfortable. We therefore don't have these episodes that come up too much.
Yeah.
So it would be looking at that, and again, I'm very generically, as a coach, your core values, what's important to you, and also looking back at your childhood, like, has this come from somewhere? Like, did someone impose this on you at a young age? Like, did you not feel like you fitted in with your family? What's that, like unpacking quite a lot, but it's because there's a disconnect, and I'd be trying to reconnect with that.
Yeah, interesting. And I agree. I think what I like about what you said is that, well, lots of what I like, a lot of it, but it's that it's never just one thing, right? The idea that there's a silver bullet for every problem we have, that is one action resolves it. It's not true. We see it all over all over social media and all over the channels we have in our life, that it makes it seem really simple. It is not. There is a lot of work required. And if we can just accept that to begin with, that this is work that I'm going to have to keep doing and it will be worth it, that's a great starting point. I think for me, there's a few things I would recommend for people to do. First and foremost, there are instances where imposter syndrome is we're just learning something new. We're exposed in a new environment. And it is entirely unfair of ourselves to expect us to be able to do a brand new thing brilliantly first off. It's not real. Nobody gets to do that. Everybody has to learn and develop and grow. And I think this is where I hear some people talk about fake it till you make it. And I resist that phrase with, what's the word I'm looking for? With great force. I'm going to go so far as to say I hate that phrase. For me, that phrase means I have to pretend to be somebody I'm not. And having done that for 20 years, I'm not doing it anymore. If I don't know, I'm going to say, because I don't feel it reflects badly on me, holding my hand up and saying, this is brand new to me. Help me understand this a bit better so I can go off and learn on my own as well, but I'm going to need some support. So first and foremost, recognize whether you are in a new environment. Is this alien to you? In which case, recognize it for that and embrace the fact you're going to be required to grow, and growth is uncomfortable. The next thing I would say is be conscious of those two things. Is it a new environment, or are you in an environment that systemically is causing discomfort? That if you are in an environment that systemically does not create an environment where you feel included, then by definition, it's creating an environment where you are an imposter. And if it's the environment, then there's some different questions to be exploring. And if it is the environment, you then have a choice. Do I try to change the environment? That is a hugely enormously valuable endeavor, incredibly difficult to do. Or do I change my environment? I think far too much of the conversation is about it's an individual problem, whereas in actual fact, in a very great many circumstances, it's a systemic problem. So tune into that, ask yourself those questions. And then finally, I would say, look at the inclusion criteria and pay particular attention to any assumed inclusion criteria. How much of what you think is being demanded of you is actually being demanded of you? How much are you filling in the gaps? Because we never fill them, or very rarely fill them, with positive stuff that makes life easier for ourselves. We almost always fill the gaps with stories that make us small, make us less worthy. What you do once you've done that, I don't know, it's up to you. But I think that awareness piece and really let's try and deal with what the problem is rather than what we think the problem is.
I love all of that. I love all of that. And the comfort, it's being out of your comfort zone for growth, or like you said, it's actually the environment that you're never going to feel comfortable in at any point, no matter what you do.
Yeah. Brilliant. Anything you would like to add before we wrap up this episode? I'm going to ask you to choose between two topics for the next one, but on imposter syndrome, anything you would like to add?
No, I just think, considering this is the first time we've actually had a conversation about it, it's interesting where it goes and where it actually, what it actually really means. And it probably means different for different people, but in imposter and a syndrome, we know those words. And how, like you said, I guess what I got from this was we see it as a negative, but actually for some of us it propels us forward. So then that's the that's what I'm thinking, the growth that comes from being uncomfortable.
And also that's entirely human.
Yes,
this is what we're all about. That we don't get to just be like there's light and dark in all of us, all of the time.
Absolutely. And we've said it before, you can feel two things at the same time. You can feel more than two things at the same time. And it's not right or wrong, it just is. And also you saying, like, what is your head telling you a story of what the situation or feeling? No one else is seeing that and saying that it is. So it's coming back to having the facts. Like, let's take and I guess that's like, you know, emotionally detaching from the situation and actually having some kind of practice where you factually look at everything. I mean, hopefully, if you felt like that in a work environment, that you would hope now that your manager or whoever you know is the person you go to is able to support you through that. But
I don't know whether that's the case.
Well, I guess that
there are some good managers, there are some good leaders, and and whilst the opposite of the good leaders isn't bad leaders, everybody's dealing with their own stuff, right? And we can only deal with the things we're aware of. And we live in a world where we have been kind of taught to see threat all over the place. So I agree. Hopefully there are channels within an organization if it's a work situation. If there aren't, seek out other channels.
Absolutely. And I guess that, you know, comes back to why coaching is so valuable, where we feel the value in it, is because it is that safe space to explore this and someone to be able to give you that opportunity to have reflection.
Yeah.
And not attached to any of your life. So it becomes much more factual for us if we have a client rather than emotionally driven, because we're not, we're removed from the situation that most clients talk about.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Lisa. Thoroughly enjoyable. I hope people find this insightful, it resonates in some way. We would love to hear what you think. Along with the name change, we have a change of email. He says, now trying to remember what that email is. I had meant to do this a bit sooner. The email, should you wish to get in touch with the show, is hands up if you're human. It's your, not you are. Just drop the apostrophe. Hands up if you're human at gmail.com. We would love to hear your thoughts, any reflections you've had on this episode, but also importantly, experiences and thoughts on the upcoming episodes. So Lisa, two choices. Well, one choice between two options. Either boundaries and balance or acceptance. Both of which are requests from other people.
I think boundaries and balance.
Okay, nice and quick one. So if we would love to hear experiences, stories, anything you would like to share about boundaries and balance, either the presence of the processes you've gone through to put things in place that create boundaries and balance, or lack thereof and the impact it's having on you, all those kind of things, please feel free. We would love to hear from you. Hands up if you're human at gmail.com. And that's us. I think that's the end of the episode. So we will leave you to the rest of your days. Please share, like, comment, review, all that kind of stuff, assuming you are enjoying the podcast. If you're not, just pass on by. Find something else. There's lots out there. Anyway, that is us. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Wyndham.
I'll see you soon.
Yeah. All right, love. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.